I know you may not want to think about having a cesarean birth, but it's better to be prepared just in case. Today's guest will help you really understand how you can feel fulfilled even if you have a cesarean birth. Welcome to the All About Pregnancy and Birth podcast. I'm Dr. Nicole Calloway Rankins, a board-certified OBGYN physician and certified integrative health coach. Every week, I break down topics, share birth stories, or interview experts to help you have your very best pregnancy and birth. Quick note, the information is for educational purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice. See the full disclaimer at ncrcoaching.com/disclaimer. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I know your time is valuable, so I am grateful that you choose to spend a little bit of time with me. Now, today's episode is a full one. I have Linnea Taylor on, and she is sharing her birth stories about her cesarean births. Linnea is a full-time stay-at-home parent and a part-time artist. She specializes in hand-drawn logos and brand artwork. She lives with her husband and 4 children in beautiful Gillette, Wyoming. Now, Linnea and I have a great conversation about her 4 cesarean births. In her first pregnancy, she had to have a cesarean because of a rare pregnancy complication. And despite her wanting something different, she ended up with cesarean births for her other 3 babies as well. Now, in this episode, Linnea is really able to show you how you can acknowledge the disappointment of things not going exactly the way you want, yet still find joy in your births. This will be helpful so that you can be more prepared for that inherent unpredictability of birth. It's also helpful if you already know you're going to have a cesarean section and you feel some disappointment about that. Now, this is a longer episode, so I want to jump right in, but do be sure to join us afterwards in the All About Pregnancy and Birth podcast community on Facebook. We can continue the conversation there. I also post inspirational quotes in the group and tips about pregnancy. I also go live in the group to answer questions. I'll link to the group in the show notes if you're not already a part of it. Quick warning before we get into the episode, Linnea does talk about having a miscarriage in the beginning of the show, so if that will bother you, skip ahead a few minutes. Okay, without further ado, let's get to the episode with Linnea Taylor. Hi, Linnea. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your birth stories.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, good. So why don't we start off by having you tell us a little bit about you, your work if you want to, and your family.
Well, I live in Wyoming with my husband, Ben. We've been married for 12 years, or almost 12 years. We have 4 kids.
Okay.
And 2 boys and 2 girls. I got married when I was 18.
Oh, wow.
Which seems so wild now. I thought I was ready for it, but
right.
I mean, I wouldn't change anything, but it was a wild ride. We got pregnant for the first time when I was 20. We lost that baby, unfortunately, when I was 12 weeks along. And that really was very traumatic for me.
I'm sure, especially being so far along. You may have had an ultrasound and...
I did, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I pretty much had kind of what I imagined was like a little delivery, because there was a mix-up at the doctor and they thought I had past tissue or something.
Right.
But they didn't check with the ultrasound, so it ended up happening at home at night, and I didn't know what was going on. And so
that was incredibly scary. I mean, I know we were having you on to talk about some of your experiences with C-section, but we might as well go there since you brought it up. That must have been pretty tough.
It was really tough. I didn't know what was happening. Well, I had started bleeding, and I went to the emergency room, and they found out the baby must have died a couple of days before or something. And that was just so crushing, and because of how much I'd already bled, or I'm not really, now that I'm older and a little wiser, I'm like really questioning what happened there, but why they weren't more thorough. But they sent me home with some painkillers, and then a couple days later, I had still been bleeding, but when I got my cervix checked, it was completely closed. So the doctor said, you're done now and you'll get better. And that night I just started getting such extreme cramping. And, I'd it was my first time ever having been pregnant, and I I didn't really know what was going on. I'm like, oh, now it's really hurting. And my husband also was really clueless about what was going on.
Right.
But it hurt. I mean, it was extreme pain. And I imagine it was like a little version of laboring for a baby.
Yeah.
And it was just, it was so terrible. It happened, and it was just so traumatic to have that happen
Right.
like, at home as a surprise when you think it's already done.
Right. Of course. Of course. Oh my gosh. That is clearly a lot to go through. And obviously it's still kind of the way you describe it, some ways it feels like it's probably still kind of fresh for you, even though it's
Oh
been
yeah.
12 years ago.
hmm Oh, so anyway, that was a very hard time for us,
Right.
but
And then you went on
I
to
was,
get pregnant
yeah,
again, though.
yeah. So when that first pregnancy happened, we weren't trying to have a baby, and when it happened, we were so excited, but we hadn't really been trying. So when we lost our first baby, it kind of awakened that desire in us to have children, even though I was
Mm-hmm.
still so young. I was 21 at the time.
Right.
But at that point, I was like having dreams about nursing a baby, which I had never done before. And it was just
Right.
like, I just thought, well, I want to be a mom. I had always wanted to be a mom, but I really, really tried. So for like probably, I think it was about 9 months we tried,
Okay.
trying while I was ovulating. And so in my at the time, it felt like took forever to get pregnant for the second time. Now looking back, I'm like, oh, it's only 9 months. That's
It
not
does.
bad.
It does feel like forever. I mean, it took
Yeah.
us like 6 months with our first, and I was like, "This is I'm gonna go stir crazy here." Like it feels like forever.
Yes. Yeah. Like every time I started my period, it was like, oh, I'm not pregnant. It was
Right.
terrible. But when we got pregnant, about 9 months later, we were so excited and afraid,
Yeah.
um, and I worked up until after my third baby. So all during this time for my miscarriage and my subsequent three pregnancies, I worked as a TSA officer at the airport.
Okay.
Um, which is kind of worth noting just because it was kind of a physical job and it was
Right.
really strange, like middle of the night hours at the airport. Um, and so I was just nervous working there when I got pregnant because I had lost the first baby and I just didn't know, I had that guilt, like, did I overdo it or
Which of course you didn't. I hope going back. I hope you don't feel guilty or like you did anything because unfortunately
yeah,
miscarriage happens.
yes, thankful and thank you for that. I mean, I do now, I'm 30 now. I look back and I don't feel any guilt, but when I was just so upset over it, it's like, all those
Of
emotions, like,
course.
but so when I got pregnant with my daughter, she's 8 now, we were so excited. But anyway, I guess I don't need to go into all that. I was supposed to be talking about my family,
No,
but,
that's okay. That's okay.
but yeah, so I worked as a government employee at the airport for like 7 years. After that, I was able to come home and be a stay-at-home mom, which was a big heart's desire of mine. So my last baby, my youngest, he was the only baby that I was like, I was at home from his conception to his birth. Like I wasn't working outside of the home or working irregular hours. And now I am a stay-at-home mom
Okay.
and I am a part-time artist. So I do a lot of like branding work and logos and stuff.
Okay. Awesome.
And about me, I guess, if you want to know,
Yeah.
I just am kind of a regular lady. I just love my kids. I love spending time with them and my husband. And I love to read. I love hanging out with my friends. I love going to the movies. My husband says I'm like a walking IMDb because I love the movies and talking
Right.
about them
Right. Right.
and going to see them. But that's just, I guess, a little rundown about me.
Okay. Okay. So you have four children, and you said the oldest is 8?
Yes, I have an 8-year-old girl, a 6-year-old girl, a 4-year-old boy, and a little boy who's going to turn 2 next month.
Okay. All right. So you have a full household for sure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I know you have four, but I want to focus most of our discussion on talking about the first and the second pregnancy. So you talked about, or second children, I should say. So you were, of course, very nervous, anxious with the first pregnancy, but overall, how did things go? How was your pregnancy? What was it like? And what was your prenatal care like?
I went to a doctor that was recommended to me. Beginning part of the pregnancy was really chill. I didn't have nausea except just like some food aversions. And thankfully, I'd go in and I'd hear her heartbeat and everything was just very, I guess, normal.
Okay.
And that was great, 20-week appointment. I had my first ultrasound with her, where they do the anatomy scan and everything.
Right.
And that was so exciting. And to find out she was a girl,
Yeah.
and they sent us up to talk to the doctor. When we got up there, the lady, I think she was like a physician's assistant, she kind of had the expression of someone who was like about to break news,
Right.
and she was telling us that we had a complete placenta previa.
Okay. And for the listeners, really quickly, a placenta previa is when the placenta completely covers the opening of the cervix, and it can be pretty dangerous and lead to significant bleeding that can affect your baby. So it's a pretty substantial issue in pregnancy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'd never heard of it, and she said, okay, look, she was showing us on the ultrasound. She's like, this is a complete previa, it's just dead center over your cervix. I'm like, oh, well, is the baby okay? And she's like, oh, yeah, baby's fine, So I don't know if like God was protecting me from a lot of unnecessary worry or what, but like I wasn't freaked out by the news because I was just so happy to learn that she was looking good,
Right.
at the time.
Right. And you've never heard of this thing before. It probably sounded like something like out of the blue kind of thing. Like,
Yeah, I
okay.
never heard of it. Yeah.
Right.
So I'm like, okay. And so she said, I was going to be on pelvic rest, no sex, no bending unnecessarily. She was telling me how she didn't want me, ever getting an exam, like a cervical exam, unless absolutely necessary. And they were telling me at that point that unless the placenta really moved up, that I'd be having a C-section.
And I'll say which often it does, and I don't know how your story is going to end, but often it does. Most of the time it actually will move up.
Yes, and I was hopeful of that. So yeah, she told me, okay, you're gonna, if it doesn't move, be prepared that you'll need a C-section. And I thought, okay, just waiting. And so I went and I told like the people at my job that I couldn't be lifting suitcases anymore, or like there was a bunch of things I couldn't do. So I was kind of on limited duty at my job and for the duration of my pregnancy. So I was just trying to take it real easy at work. So I got subsequent ultrasounds just to check on the cervix, and it just never budged. It just stayed dead center.
Okay.
And I mean, I was worried as far as like, because I lived in North Dakota at the time. So she was born in January. So the whole winter, I wore those little cleats on that you kind of strap onto your shoes because like they're like ice pick shoes or something.
Right.
I was so worried about slipping that I wore those everywhere and just would go click, 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 like
Wow.
just. So as I got further along in the pregnancy, I more people started, like I'd go in to see, because sometimes I'd get worried because I hadn't felt the baby move in, I didn't know how long, maybe like 6 or 7 hours. So I'd just work myself into a tizzy at my job. So I'd have to leave and go to the hospital to get a monitor on. And
Right.
And the nurses would always say, they'd look at my chart and they'd say, oh, you haven't had any bleeding yet? And I'd say no. And then the more people I had tell me that as I got later on in the pregnancy, like 7, 8 months pregnant, I started being like, wow, like what's going to happen here?
Right.
Like, am I just going to start like bleeding a lot, or is the baby going to be okay? I did get pretty worried as the pregnancy went on. I didn't end up loving my first OB doctor. And I really think I can pinpoint. Well, she was the one who told me not to get a cervical exam like ever. Like
Mm-hmm.
she's like, it's just so sensitive, and nothing should be up there, you know. And one of the times when I had gone into the hospital they wanted check out something. A guy came in who was like a resident or
Okay,
something,
right.
and because he said something about training, or he wasn't even a resident. I think he was, well, maybe like an intern or something. I'm not sure, but
Okay.
he was like, okay, you know, and we're gonna do a quick cervical check, you know. And I said, well, hold on, you know, they told me not to. And he's like, well, your doctor wants you to get a cervical check. And I just didn't know if she actually had said that, or if he just thought that was the routine, or
Oh
I
no,
just,
he was wrong. He was just dead
yes.
wrong. Yeah.
Well, I was so protective, and so then I had a nurse, like a head nurse, like
Mm-hmm.
whatever you call them, but she
Right.
came in and she was unkind to me and said, honey, you know, we're the professionals here, and you need to have your cervix checked.
Oh my goodness.
And I said, well, I have placenta previa, and, you know, I'm telling her all this, and she's like, doctor, whoever, you know, wants you to have it done. And I said, well, if she's here, could she come and talk to me? Because she had told me not to. I'd like to hear it from her.
Right.
And they're like, well, she's busy and she couldn't come for like another hour. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And so she did come, and she did want me to have one, I guess. And she was so upset at me for not just letting them do it. And
Oh, that sucks. I mean,
I know it really did.
especially
Yeah.
since
And
I mean you've been told, and you had at that point had you been told that the placenta had moved at all?
mm-mm. No,
Oh,
it didn't move.
right.
So I don't even remember why she wanted this cervix check, but she ended up doing it. And she was just visibly really upset at me. And that was definitely not the best day.
Of course.
As we got nearer to the end of the pregnancy, around 36 weeks, the doctor said the baby seemed like she was getting big, and that they worry about a big baby, you know, resting on that, because the placenta was still just dead center over my cervix.
Right.
And they said that if they do an amniocentesis test and to check if the lung fluid was mature enough,
Right.
and if it was, they wanted to deliver the baby because she just seemed to be getting big. They were worried that if they didn't, that I'd have some kind of episode like bleeding or baby would be in danger. So we went to the hospital, and you know, I wasn't worried about a C-section because I had been kind of thinking about it since 20 weeks.
Right.
So I really had all that time to kind of accept it. And
Right.
so at that time, I wasn't like heartbroken over having to have a C-section. I was just excited about the baby. And
Right, of course. And it's your first baby, and after the miscarriage
yes,
and
yes.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, and
Yeah, it
I'm
was just,
sorry, I just can't let go of this checking your cervix thing, because
I know.
did she look with a speculum, or did she like
I think it
check
was
you?
just a hand.
Oh, well, I that is just
I mean,
you
she
just
may have used, I mean, in my memory, I feel,
right.
because yeah.
Uh, but you know that you probably wouldn't have the nurses, and they don't usually do like speculum exams. It's just so like outside of what we practice, in terms of we really don't, especially if your placenta was dead center, would not have wanted to touch anything to irritate
Yeah.
anything. So anyway, I'm sorry. So there
Yeah, I
you
know. I was hung up on it too.
right. So you get your they're thinking about doing the amniocentesis to deliver baby, and so what
Yeah.
happens then? Yeah.
And I did, I mean, even though I did end up switching OBs, I mean, I am thankful for the care that lady provided for me. And like when she did the amniocentesis test, which hurt a lot, and she was very kind that day. And, you know, I could tell, I mean, she was awesome, like just the way she made me feel good that day. And so,
Right.
you know, I just, maybe she was having a rough day or something. I don't know.
Right.
But
Right.
I went in there and I just thought that we'd end up having the baby that day, but the test came back that no, the lungs were not mature, and they would wait again and do it the next week. So I went home and it was kind of like, okay, I'd already gotten off of work. Like I'd already started my maternity leave like the day before because I thought we were having the baby. So that ended up actually being a nice time for my husband and I just to take a few days and like go see a movie and
Right.
relax
Yeah.
together because he was off work and I was off work. So it was on a Saturday and we were watching like TV and I was eating way too much like pizza and popcorn and just, I mean, was just eating a lot of food because we were just hanging out. And it was like pretty late at night. Like I went to the bathroom and when I wiped, there was blood on the toilet paper. And I just freaked out, like it's happening,
Right.
you know, like this is not a drill. And
Right.
I am not a chill person. Like, oh my gosh.
Well,
And
we
so,
gotta all know where we stand. So,
yep. Bless my husband. He has to always deal with it. Oh, but I was just started screaming out in the bathroom and my husband Ben says he knew right away like what must have been going on. And we just flew out the door. Like I didn't bring anything with me. I just had my pajamas on and Ben drove me there and he didn't have time to start the car, so our teeth were chattering the whole time. And thankfully we only lived like 5 minutes from the hospital.
oh,
So
good.
I called them ahead of time and they said, okay, come right up, like through the emergency room. And so I got up there. I told them what happened. They put me in a gown and I didn't know what would happen, like if they'd make me stay there while they monitored the bleeding or what. But then I had the doctor who was on call. She came in and she said, okay, we're taking you back. And so it was kind of like a mix between like an expected C-section and also an emergency C-section,
Right.
because I knew I was going to have one when the time came, but it still felt like such a shock. I mean, I'm like,
Right.
what?
Right.
Right
Right.
now?
Yeah.
And shout out to that doctor because I love her. She ended up delivering all three of my kids.
Okay.
Anyway, so we went in and, Ben, I'm just like freaking out. Like, oh my gosh, I'm just shaking. Like, I can't believe it. Well, then Ben is just so excited. He's like calling people, she's going in. And I'm like, hold on, get off the phone. Like, we got, they throw some scrubs on him. I mean, it all just happened so fast. I mean, like they're pushing me down the hall and the nurses are kind of pulling bobby pins out of my hair.
Right.
It happened really fast. And I, my husband, I gave him a kiss and I kind of thought, the next time I see you, Lord willing, there's going to be a little baby out. And, so I went in the operating room and I've never had surgery before that.
Mm-hmm.
So that was in and of itself like a shock. Just it's so different than like it looks on TV. Like, But, and I was pretty much naked, and then they're getting ready, buzzing around me. It's like they're all so kind, but but they're busy doing their jobs,
Right.
so it's
Right.
almost like they're not even there. I was just so nervous, but so excited because I felt safe then. Like on the way to the hospital, I felt nervous, but then I thought, okay, they have the monitor on the baby. They're about to take her out. Like we're made it to the finish line. So I was so thankful. And it, before they even like shaved me down there or put a catheter in, they put me to sleep.
Why did they not normally we do the spinal medication in the back. Why did they not do that?
If my memory serves me correctly, I think they said they were worried about bleeding.
Mm. Okay. Okay.
And I don't remember being surprised about being asleep that first time. So I think they had told me that ahead of time that for that C-section, they were just going to put me under general anesthesia.
Right.
So I went to sleep, and because I hadn't had a spinal block when I woke up, it's like it felt like I had no painkiller in my system.
Mm.
I was so much in pain.
Oh,
And
goodness.
I was in a dark recovery room and the lady there was super nice. But, I'm like, is the baby okay? And she goes, oh yeah. They were kind of telling me about her. Oh, she has a lot of hair. And I had told Ben ahead of time, like, don't worry. I just go hang out with the baby. The doctors can take care of me and you just enjoy, like, someone's got to be there for the baby's like first moments. And
Right.
oh, and I should mention that they let him in, which was so nice. So at least one parent gets to tell the story of her like coming out and her
Yeah.
first cry.
Yeah. That is nice because usually we actually don't let a family member in when somebody goes under general anesthesia.
Yes, because when I had to go under general for my second, and they pushed back a little bit, but Ben really said, I was allowed in the first one, and so he made sure he talked ahead of time and got it kind of written down. I'm allowed in there.
Right.
But anyway, so yeah, when I woke up, thankfully she did have to be in the NICU because her lungs were immature.
Okay.
So I was like almost 37 weeks. And she stayed in there for 10 days, but they were not life-threatening, or, they weren't too concerned. They just there were like little setbacks. So that is her birth story.
Okay.
And that was just her being in the NICU, and it took a while to get nursing down because I didn't even get to hold her till she was like 4 days old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So that was like the hardest newborn stage.
Sure.
Of all my kids.
And for your first one too. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And again, I didn't know kind of what I was missing, so I wasn't that torn up about it. Like,
Gotcha.
I was just so thankful she was fine.
Gotcha.
And people kept talking to me kind of in a consolatory way, oh, I'm so sorry you had to have a C-section. I'm so sorry your baby's in the NICU, And I did appreciate the concern, but I'm like, hey, I'm just so glad.
Like, I got a baby, so.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just so excited.
Right. So then, and it's hard to have your baby in the NICU. My first daughter was born 8 weeks early, and she was in the NICU for a month. And she had to have surgery after she was born. So, you can't quite explain to anybody what it's like to have your baby in the NICU. It's something you never quite forget.
Yeah. And, I know that I would have been really freaked out if the same thing had happened to like my fourth baby.
Right.
Because like once I saw what a normal or a typical baby had their experience right after birth, I thought it actually scared me in retrospect, thinking about my first daughter's experience. Like,
yeah.
Because at the time I was just kind of blissfully unaware, like, okay, the doctors say she's going to be fine.
Right.
But now when I look back, I'm like, oh, that would scare me so bad now.
Yeah.
I mean, it scared me. I mean, I was worried and concerned for her at the time, but I wasn't like super freaked out. And I think that it would have freaked me out even more if it had happened like after I'd already had just like a typical baby that comes into your room. And
for sure. So then you get through that pregnancy, the delivery, get your baby home, and then it sounds like a couple years later found yourself pregnant again. And
yes,
did you decide that, and I know just from, talking to you a little bit via your story, you wanted to have a VBAC or try for a VBAC. What was your thought process in making that decision about VBAC versus repeat cesarean section? I
had always had that vision of pushing a baby out. It's something that I just loved the idea of. And I wasn't ready to give up on that dream. My doctor said that I was a good candidate for a VBAC because it's not like I had had an unsuccessful labor before.
Correct. Yep. So you felt like your doctor was supportive of your decision?
Oh, she was very supportive. And this was, my new doctor. She had been the emergency one who had delivered my daughter. And
right.
She was very supportive, and I really believed that it was going to happen. So I actually went to like birthing classes for the first time.
Right.
Like I hadn't gone to birthing classes my first because I thought, well, I'm not even going to be able to give birth, so it doesn't matter. I was just so excited. And her pregnancy, again, was pretty chill. I was just relishing the ability to do whatever I wanted because wasn't on pelvic rest, you know.
Right.
So I was exercising and just I felt so good, and it was the summer, which made a difference.
Right.
Like, anyway, so I was super excited to try the VBAC, and as it got closer, you know, I was nervous because you know I heard about like the risks,
Right.
but I was just hopeful, you know. And it's funny because with my first daughter, I had a lot of Braxton Hicks contractions, even early on, because you know she was born at 36 weeks, so I didn't even get to the later part of my pregnancy. But with my second daughter, I was like not having any Braxton Hicks contractions.
Like nothing. She was just chilling in there like
Yes. And so as it got closer, I mean, I guess I don't know when they start the weekly cervical checks, like at 36 weeks or 35 weeks.
Yeah, around about there. And that's not necessarily standard that all OBs do it, just because it doesn't necessarily give us any additional information. But roughly, yeah, around 35, 36 weeks for doctors who do it, that's when they'll do it. But it's really not necessary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I would get really, though I hate cervical exams, I don't know who likes them, but
yes,
I would
exactly.
get excited.
I always tell people, like, yeah, whenever women tell me like I hate cervical exams, I'm like, well, if you liked it, that might be kind of strange. So
yes. Oh, that's so true. But I got kind of like excited because I kept thinking they were going to be like, oh my gosh, you're so far dilated, or you never know, you know, because
right.
I had friends of mine, you know, that would always have those stories about, oh, I went in and I was 5 centimeters dilated, you know. So I was just so geared up and pumped. And, you know, every time I'd get checked, they're like, wow, you are just not even a fingertip dilated. Like you are
Oh,
just.
and you're like, okay, great, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was doing everything that you've ever heard of
Okay,
as like,
you got to tell us what you were doing. So,
okay. Like, I mean, people say that, you know, having sex can initiate labor. Like
right.
so we were trying that, you know, all the time. And, you know, I was squatting. Like, I mean, I pretty much just was like walking around squatting or lunging like all the time. I mean, this was once I was like 38, 39
yeah,
weeks.
yeah.
Um, and, you know, I'm eating the spicy food and walking it out. And I wasn't even having like one Braxton Hicks injection. I mean, I've come to learn that I must have like the cervix of steel or something. I don't know what.
Right.
But anyway, so we tried everything. I mean, I went past the 40-week mark, and, you know, the doctor's like, oh, honey, I'm so sorry that you were just not dilating, you know. She's like, so we got closer, and she's like, we need to schedule it for that 41 week. And actually, now looking back, I realize how cool it was that my doctor was willing to let me go that far.
Right. So she said, if no labor by 41 weeks, then go ahead and schedule a C-section.
Yes, pretty much. I'll see you then, or I'll see you when you're laboring.
Right. Right. And did she talk at all about inducing your labor?
She did not, because this might just be like a North Dakota thing or something, but she said they do not induce women who have had a C-section because it could thin the uterine lining or something.
Yeah, it does increase the risk of uterine rupture, the scar from the uterus opening just a little bit. So not all doctors are comfortable doing induction when a woman has had a C-section before. So I'm not entirely surprised to hear that.
So yeah, so like the day came and I was feeling bummed, you know, because I'm like, oh, come on, you know.
Right. You've done all the preparation, you went to the classes and everything.
Uh-huh. I know Ben and I, like, you know, we had sex like a couple hours before we went for the C-section.
That was that last ditch effort. We just gonna try it.
And it's just funny because I went in and, you know, and I asked the doctor, because I asked, I think it was somebody like I don't think it was my doctor. It was like a nurse, but I said, could you please check me one more time? Like, this is after I was like, had my like hairnet on or whatever you call it, like for the
Right.
surgery,
Right.
I said, could you check me just one more time just to see like if I'm dilating? And she said, wow, there's just nothing.
Okay.
Um,
Right.
and so I thought, all right, God's will be done. We'll go in and do the C-section. And I was so excited because I thought, it's kind of a win-win because it's like I'll either get to have a VBAC or I get to be awake this time.
Right.
Because I think most people want to be awake for their
Oh,
birth of their
sure.
child.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like,
I would agree.
I mean, and so I went in and I was just so excited and I was nervous too because I'm like, what's this going to be like being awake and experiencing a C-section? But I was so excited and I went in and I had mentioned, because I have scoliosis,
Mm-hmm.
a pretty pronounced curvature. I had to wear a brace for a couple years when I was a teenager. Um,
Okay.
and it hadn't ever occurred to me to really talk about it before to the doctors. But that day I kind of, when the anesthesiologist came in to talk to me about the spinal block, I hadn't had that conversation before because they never had planned on giving me a spinal block with the other pregnancy. So this was my
Right.
first time talking to an anesthesiologist about the spinal block. And I was talking to him and I said, this is just a couple minutes before he went in the operating room. I said, I have scoliosis. Like, is that going to mess anything up? And he said, oh, I don't think so. I've had a lot of patients with scoliosis. Like, um, I'm sure it'll just be fine, And he's like, I've hardly ever seen that happen. And I think he said he'd never seen it happen. Um, so anyway, we went in and it was much different than my first C-section because I was awake and while they were, shaving me and putting the catheter in, and that was a new experience. Like, I'm like, geez, I just felt so exposed because I'm just like naked and your
Right.
legs are in like the frog leg position, and
Right.
but again, I was super excited. So then they had me sit up for the spinal block and that hurt a lot more than I thought it was going to.
Mm.
But they're so kind. They were so kind to me. They laid me down and they said, okay, they were explaining to me what it was going to feel like. I didn't feel that numb yet. And I kept, well, when
Okay.
am I supposed to feel numb? And
Right.
they're, they're like, well, it'll come. And I laid there and I was like, should I be able to wiggle my feet? And
Right.
they're like, that's kind of weird, but they're like, no, you're just fine. And so then a doctor came in and she's talking and talking to the other people in the room and talking to me. And she's like, okay, Linnea, I'm going to start doing some tests, And I was like, ouch, because it hurt. And she said, does that really hurt? Or do you just feel the sensation of being touched?
And you're like, no, it hurt.
Yeah, I said, that really hurts, And then I started moving my legs and she said, wow. Like,
You
because
shouldn't be able to do that. Yeah.
yeah, she hadn't been in there when I was moving my legs a couple of minutes before. But she's like, oh, honey, she did a couple more tests and they waited 5 or 10 minutes maybe. And she said, the lady who put it in, the spinal block, she was in there and she said, when I put that in, I put it in perfectly. Like, she's like, I just can't see us the point of trying the spinal block again.
Okay.
She's like, I really felt like I got the needle right in the right place. And,
Right. Right.
um, and so my doctor came up and she just was so sweet and caring. She just kind of stroked my head and she's like, you know what, honey, it looks like you have to go to sleep again. And I just was crying so hard that my teeth were chattering.
Oh,
I wanted to be awake.
of course. Yeah. And it was like you were having the VBAC. You weren't going to get
Yeah.
the VBAC. And then the thing that you thought you were going to get being awake, you weren't going to get that either.
Yeah. So I didn't even get to see Ben in that moment because, they don't bring him in until I would be already set up.
Right.
So I didn't even get to have him there saying like, when I had parted ways with him, I thought I was going to see him when I was awake. He told me later, that he was so sad and disappointed for me when they came out and told him that I had to be asleep again, but they did let him in again.
Okay.
Anyway, so they put me to sleep. So that's like kind of the last thing I remember there is again, them counting backwards, and I just drifted off. She was born in the daytime, so it was daylight, and I was in the recovery area for however long that is, like an hour or something. And
Mm-hmm.
then they started wheeling me up to the next level where the baby was, because she didn't have to be in the NICU. She was just a big 41-week baby
Right. How big was she?
who was healthy. Well, she was 8'6",
Okay. So she was solid for
which is,
sure.
yes, but you know what? I forgot to mention this. The funniest thing, my baby, my first girl, who was
Uh-huh.
born at almost 37 weeks, she was
Right.
8'10".
Dang. Linnea. Oh my
Yes.
goodness.
So she was bigger at 36 and a half weeks than her sister was at 41 weeks.
Oh my, if you would have gone the full term, she'd have been like 10 pounds.
Yes. Well, I was 10 and a half pounds when I was born.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, so but anyway, so when they wheeled me up to the room after my second daughter was born, it was a whole new experience because it's so different than having your baby in the NICU.
Mm-hmm.
Just to have a healthy baby just
Yeah.
out. And as they're wheeling me into my room, I hear this baby crying. And my first thought was, oh man, I have to share a room and that other lady's baby's crying.
I think that's your baby.
And they wheeled me around, my husband holding a baby that's crying, and it just hit me. Oh, that's my baby. And it was the coolest thing because
Oh.
I didn't even look at her face before I nursed her. Like, I unlatched my gown and she went right on, and she like had the latch like a 10-month-old. And it was just so special to me because even though I had to be asleep, it was like in that moment, just so awesome, because
Yeah.
to be able to hold your baby so soon, because I hadn't been able to hold my other baby girl. And it was just so neat. So like she nursed for like 40 minutes before I could take her off the breast and really look at her for the first time.
Right.
So that was a positive time.
So, how do you feel like you coped with the disappointment of not being able to have a VBAC and not being awake for the surgery? Do you feel like everything just kind of came together once you were able to hold her, or just how did you cope with that?
Well, like I was super sad right before the surgery, and I just was very like, just so sad because I'm just like, I
Mm-hmm.
really wanted just to be awake at least, like just to
Right.
hear the baby's first cry or look at her before she gets cleaned up or something like. But after she was born and I got to hold her, it was so special that like I felt very um consoled. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? This couldn't get stolen from me. Like, no matter how you meet your baby, like, it's such a special time. Like,
Right.
yes, I had to be asleep, but, I realized, wow, but look at my beautiful baby. So I felt better, but I think in the back of my mind, I thought maybe I'd get a chance still sometime to get a vaginal birth. So I think, and I'm very thankful, but I think if anything, I feel just now that I know that my childbearing season is over, I do feel disappointment sometimes, because I just, that would have been cool to experience a vaginal birth. But I mean, not like devastating disappointment, just like, oh, I think it would have been cool to like go to France, but
I
it's
know
not
what you
kind of,
mean. I
yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. I feel the same way. I had C-sections for both of my
Oh, yeah.
deliveries, and I do have that sort of like, it would have been nice to have that experience, but it kind of is what it
Hmm.
is.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm just so thankful because overall they were so kind at the hospital and
Right.
very caring. So I think I coped pretty well.
It sounds like it for sure, for sure. Now, when it came to number 3, was there any discussion about VBAC? A lot of doctors are not comfortable with that, so it's quite possible there was no discussion.
Yeah, I didn't have any hope or like I didn't think the doctor would let me. I mean, I had like these like fantasies like, oh, what if I like went into labor and just had the baby like really fast.
Right, right.
But I was surprised when my doctor said that she said, well, if you go into labor before 39 weeks, she's like, I'm fine with you laboring until if it got to a dangerous point, then I would do a C-section. But I think that it's fine if you're allowed to labor if you go before 39 weeks.
Oh, nice. So she was actually open to the
Hmm.
possibility. That's actually
Yes.
not very common. A lot of doctors are not common with VBAC after two C sections. So that's really encouraging to hear.
Yes, I've learned that too. Like since then, I've realized, wow, that was really kind of her, and I'm glad she kind of trusted the situation. Um, and so I did have that hope in the back of my mind that I would just kind of like magically go into labor. Not that I ever had before,
Right.
but it didn't happen. 39 weeks. I went in for a scheduled C-section, and
Please tell me you were awake for this one.
oh yeah, yes, and it
Okay.
was. Well, I had talked this time. I talked to them ahead of time. I said, "Listen, I have history of spinal blocks not working. I don't know if it has to do with my scoliosis or not, and I don't know if that made any difference or what. But they were going to try to be really, really, really particular and like putting it in the right spot or something. But they said,
Got it.
it still may not work because you have a history of it not working." And I was just very prepared for anything at that point.
Okay.
And had really strategized that I was going to be thankful no matter what, you know.
Mm-hmm. That's a good attitude. That's a great attitude to have to try to find what you can be grateful for in the moment,
Mhm.
even during challenging times.
Thanks. Yeah, I was really trying to just, get just have a right headspace. And so I went in, and again, they were so sweet to me. I'm always just, I don't know why I'm surprised when they're so nice, but they're just so many healthcare professionals are just so nice and caring. And when you're scared or you're naked in an operating room or whatever, it
Mm-hmm.
just means so much to have that tender conversation and people to genuinely care about you. It just means so
Right.
much. His birth, I mean, it was just so exciting. I mean, it was just one of the best moments of my life because just to be awake, like
Yeah.
I went in and he put the spinal block in and immediately it felt different than the other one I
Okay.
ever had. Like
Okay. Good.
I thought, oh, so this is what they're talking about.
Right,
Like,
right. I know that felt like I had a similar for my first C-section, the anesthesia wasn't working properly and I could feel way more than I should have. And then the second one, it was like, oh, this is what you mean when you're supposed to
yeah.
be numb. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because it's like I couldn't even, because it hurt again going in, and I kept thinking, I hope this works because this is such a waste of a painful experience. Like, it doesn't work. And I mean, I got numb so fast that like I couldn't even put my own legs back on the table,
Gotcha.
and that got me excited. And
You've
I just,
never been so excited to not feel your legs before.
oh yeah. I mean, I'm telling you, my face must have looked like a woman who was like winning the lottery. I mean, I was so excited. I was not nervous at all. As soon as I
Right.
knew that was working, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, and so they laid me back and it started going up my chest, the numbness
Mm-hmm.
or up to my chest.
Right.
And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, they were shaving me and putting my catheter in, but I didn't feel it. I literally could not believe it was happening. Like to
Right.
me, that was like the best thing that could ever happen to me in my whole life. And then my husband came in, and he was crying when he saw me awake.
Right.
And I was crying because he was just so happy for me, and I was
Oh.
and I was happy for me.
Right.
And
Okay.
it was just a really tender moment with my husband because he was just he was sad when I was sad. So just for
Yeah.
him to stay awake, he was so happy. He was crying and I was crying. And the doctor came in and she's like, "Okay, Linnea, I'm gonna do some tests, like the pinch tests or whatever."
Mm-hmm.
And she pinched, and at this time, I still thought, "Who knows if it's gonna work?" And she just gives a pinch, and I said, "I don't feel anything." And she goes, "Okay, I'm going to look at some other things." And I still wasn't feeling anything. And I said, "Do you think it's going to work?" And she said, "Oh, it's working. I already made the incision."
Yeah.
And again, I was so excited. Like, who gets excited that they're cut open? But I was like, so excited. Like,
Right.
I couldn't believe it. Like, even now, it's been like 4 years since that day. And when I talk about it, I get so excited because it's just so magical. Like even just a C-section, it felt so magical to be awake, and they were tugging and it felt really weird. And then they kind of had to push him out. So
Right.
they were I had multiple lady nurses kind of leaning in on my chest and my stomach, trying to wiggle him out.
So what was that moment like for you then when you
Oh,
first heard him?
it was I just like the breath went out of me, I
Mm.
just cried. I just was so thankful. I mean, I felt him come out, and, he had a good cry, and the doctor she said he had a big head. He does have a big head, but
Yeah.
as she was taking him out, she's like, man, he has a big head. But, before they did anything with him, they quickly kind of brought him around the curtain and so I could see.
Uh-huh.
And when I saw him, it was like inhuman, the sound I made, like just this joy slash just shock. Like,
Right.
I mean, like I had never been awake for that. Like 1 minute you're just have a big bulbous belly. The next minute there's like a little human. It's just so weird. And it's so cool. And it was cool. And it was a blessing too, because I got to see my husband's face I had never seen the
Oh,
look on his
what?
face when he
Right.
sees a child.
Right. Yeah.
And that was so special. So they cleaned him up, or they didn't even really clean him up. They pretty much tested him, sucked out a little bit of stuff, and then they put him on my chest while the doctor stitched me up. So I got to be kind of skin to skin with him there.
Awesome.
Oh, I just loved it. I was just crying, and he just was so cute. And then
Yeah.
I never had to let go of him. They were going to move me from the operating table to a bed. And I thought, oh, you really going to let me hold him while you do that? And they said, yeah, just hold, you don't drop him. And I'm like, oh, okay. They sat me up and he nursed right away while I was doing my whole post-op thing. And it was just, I couldn't believe it. I'm sure my husband got sick of me saying, I can't believe it,
Right. Right. Right.
but I said it like 1,000 times.
That is amazing. And then just for number 4, hopefully that went similarly smoothly and
Hmm.
you were awake for that one too.
Yes, his C-section came, and again, I was braced for the spinal block not to work. I didn't want to be blindsided, so I was kind of expecting it.
Right.
But then it did work, and I loved my doctor here in Wyoming was great. I was blessed again with a great doctor to deliver my babies, and I was just so excited again. I was just so glad that it actually happened
Awesome.
again. I could be awake. So
So you didn't have any complications from any of your C-sections?
no, thankfully, no. Um, I feel like I had a harder time recovering. Like some of my friends, they have C-sections and then they'll, you know, go out to dinner at a restaurant like 4 days later. I mean,
Right.
I felt with all 4 of my C-sections, I felt like I couldn't overdo it, or I would bleed a lot or be really in
Okay.
pain. But I never had an infection or anything like that.
Okay. Okay. Well, good. That is awesome. So, to wrap things up, what are some things that you want to share, or what is one thing you would share that you wish you knew beforehand about giving birth that you would want to share with the listeners?
Oh, geez. I don't know. I guess just I wish that I would have known beforehand. First thing is that if you have a spinal block might not work, so
Mm.
you can kind of so you could be prepared for that. Open to the possibility that lots of different things could happen at the hospital. Um,
Gotcha. Yeah, it's an unpredictable process.
yes, yeah, and I think I would want other people to know. It's not exactly about childbirth, but that nursing, to me, it always hurt really bad the first 3 or 4 weeks. And once I got past that point, it's all gravy, and it was great and didn't hurt anymore. But I like to tell friends of mine that are first time moms, don't be freaked out if nursing hurts, because that was normal for me and it does go
Right.
away.
Right. I always call breastfeeding a labor of love. It's not necessarily easy or straightforward. Yeah. So then, just to end, what is like one piece of advice that you would tell women as they get ready for their birth? One piece of advice you tell them.
Well, providing that you're doing the best you can to get all the prenatal care you should have, which is a given because you most do. I would just say to try to enjoy the season that you're in as a expectant mother, you know, rest and take that quiet time to enjoy those kind of sacred days leading up to it.
Right.
And just to enjoy the time with your family as it is, whether you are just you and your partner or if you have other children, but just to savor it, you know, and it's just going to happen when it's supposed to happen as far as the birth, you know, and because those, I feel like those last few days of pregnancy are just so special. And I just don't spend them like wishing that the birth was already happening.
I think that's really great advice. Just enjoy the moment because it's just really not something that you experience very often in your life, actually. So enjoy the moment while you have it.
Yep.
Yeah. So where can women connect with you if they're interested in finding out more about you and your artwork? Where can women connect with you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram at Linnea Ruth Designs. And there I share a little bit about my artwork, and I'm actually going to I do have an Etsy shop, linnearuth.etsy.com, where I sell my like original artwork in prints. But I am going to be having a website soon for my branding artwork, and that all can be found on my Instagram account when that happens.
Awesome. And I will link to all of that in the show notes for everybody so they can reach things very easily. Well, Linnea, thank you so much for being here. This has been a really great conversation, and I know that the listeners will find it useful. The experience, I mean, you've had the gamut of experiences from miscarriage to placenta previa, a pretty rare complication in pregnancy, to C-section and not being awake for C-section. You've covered quite a bit today.
Yeah, and I'm just so thankful. I got 4 wonderful little chickens. Yep.
All right. Well, you take care. And again, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Okay. So I know that was a lot, but it was really great and inspiring conversation. Now, after every episode where I have a guest on, I do Nicole's Notes, where I give my top 3 or 4 takeaways about the episode. And here is what I take away from the episode today. Number 1, I said this in the beginning. I'm going to say it again. I say it a lot. Birth is unpredictable. None of us can really predict how birth goes. And that's even the case with cesarean sections. Linnea didn't think she was going to be asleep. You may also, even if you have a scheduled cesarean section, you may end up going into labor before your date, or your water may break before that. So get comfortable with the fact that birth is an unpredictable process. When you're able to get comfortable with that, you're better able to deal with things as they go along. Number 2, Linnea was upset about how things went, and understandably so, but she really got past it. It is okay for you to be upset if your birth doesn't go exactly the way you want it to, but I want you to be sure that you don't stay stuck in that upset state. You have to figure out a way to move forward and really enjoy the moment of having this new baby in front of you. Every woman is going to do that differently if it comes to that point. You may need help from your friends or family members or even mental health professionals, but I want you to be sure that you don't stay stuck in that upset feeling if your birth doesn't go the way that you intend. Last thing, everyone recovers differently from birth. Linnea talked about how she had a hard time recovering from her cesarean sections, but she had friends who had a pretty easy time. I personally had 2 cesarean sections, and I didn't have much of a difficult time with recovery at all. So you can learn from other women about how their experience goes. And this is the case with vaginal birth and cesarean birth. You'll have women who have easy recoveries and difficult recoveries from both, but ultimately your experience will be uniquely yours. Okay, so that's it for this week's episode. Let me know your takeaways in the podcast community Facebook group. Now be sure to subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you feel so inclined, I would really appreciate you leaving an honest review in iTunes. It helps other women find my show. Now next week on the podcast, I have Dr. Serena Pasricha. She's a gastroenterologist, and we are talking about how the gut microbiome affects pregnancy and your newborn baby. Really interesting and informative episode. You definitely don't want to miss it. So come on back next week. And until then, I wish you a healthy and happy pregnancy and birth. Today's episode is brought to you by Women's Wellness Coaching by Dr. Nicole Calloway Rankins. Head to ncrcoaching.com to check out my free 1-hour mini course on how to make your birth plan, as well as my comprehensive online childbirth education class, the Birth Preparation Course. With over 8 hours of content and a private course community, the Birth Preparation Course will leave you knowledgeable, prepared, confident, and empowered going into your birth. Head to ncrcoaching.com to learn more.